Hi everyone, hope that you're all doing well. My name is Ilyaas, and I've been asked by the Preclinical Society just to say a few words about my own study technique, my time management skills, and I hope that you will find some benefit from this. So, essentially when it comes to something like time management, it's very important to recognize that everybody has their own way of dealing with time. So I once attended a lecture on time management, and one of the profound things that the author mentioned was that there is no really such thing as time management, because time is fixed. We all have the same 24 hours a day, but really the important thing is self-management. So when it comes to time management, it's very important to remember a couple of things. You have to identify what are the things that are distracting you. And for all of us, we have different things. For me, it's my cell phone. Perhaps it's sometimes your parents, or it can be other things. But the reality is, for all of us, we all have different distractions. And it might be worth actually taking some time and writing down what you think those different distractions are. So for me, I know one of the biggest distractions is my phone. So I looked at different interventions to minimize the time that I spend on my phone. So for example, with my phone, I use this particular app called Forest, which basically, you plant a tree, and the longer you stay off your phone, the more trees you plant. So it's like this positive effect there, positive reward in a sense. The other thing that I do on my phone is that I use batch messaging. So in other words, I actually turn off my notifications for WhatsApp, and I check my messages in batches. So usually maybe every half an hour or every hour when I'm working intensely. And this is mainly because if you leave your notifications on and if you're getting lots of messages, it's so difficult to get into a state of absolute focus. And what we find is that if you really want to be in a state of optimal working and optimal flow, you have to be working for a sustained period of time. So sometimes, and you probably would have noticed this, is that as you keep on working, maybe if you work for longer than 15, 20 minutes, you start to get into the zone in a sense. You just become so focused that to leave your work is actually going to be difficult. To leave your work is actually going to be difficult. So this is what we call this concept of flow. So that's a really important aspect of time management, identifying what are the various things that are distracting you in your life. And like I said, we all have different things. For me, it's mainly my phone. The other thing is also just trying to limit the time that you spend on social media. I know it's very tempting. We're living in an age where social media is incredibly rife, and lots of benefits from social media. Also remember that it can also be an incredible distraction. So like with my social media, I try and check it in batches, because you don't need to check your phone every 5 minutes. It's actually not really that necessary, especially when it comes to social media. If you check it every hour, you can go through the same messages, as opposed to checking your phone every 5 minutes, and you end up actually wasting a lot of time. So step number one really is to minimize the distractions that you have in your life, and we're making a list of the things that distract you from your work. So the second thing I would say is having a sense of structure. Now, this can mean different things to different people. So for me, I'm just by nature, I struggle to function without having a strong structure. So I use this calendar app, as you can see. I use Apple Calendar, and I really try and plan out my life well in advance. So usually on the Sunday before the week starts, because usually the weekends are quiet, right? Unless you're on call, things happen, but usually the weekends are quite quiet. So on the Sundays, that's when I'll plan my schedule for the next week. And when I say schedule, I don't just mean your lectures, exactly what you're going to do. What are you going to do when you come home? How do you spend your evenings? What do you do in the morning? How are you going to spend your self-study time, so that by the beginning of each day, you essentially know exactly what you want to do on each day. And I know that might sound quite laborious. It can take a bit of time, but this takes me about 15 minutes on a Sunday. But at least when you start each day, you know that you're covering exactly what you wanted to cover. And it also gives you a sense of almost like a peace of mind that you know exactly what you're going to do, and you know that you've allocated time for the various tasks that you need to accomplish on that week. It's very distressing when you know that you've got so many different tasks to do and you actually haven't really created a mental picture in your mind of when you're actually going to do those tasks. So I think having a calendar app is very important. So as you can see, I use Apple Calendar. What's cool about Apple Calendar is that you can have these different categories. So medicine is obviously my main focus, but there's other aspects of my life. You can see there's leisure, um, there's Teutonic, which is a maths project that I work on. There's the MSA, which is a society that I'm a part of. So there's other stuff, you know, and this is very important because medicine, even though it consumes probably the majority of your life, it is not your life. It's not the entirety of your life. So it's important to have a balance. And I think this also goes into another piece of advice that I would like to share is that it's very important to obtain that balance, to take a break, but to be constructive in that break. You know, so maybe if you want to go for a run, jogging. I like hiking a lot. As you can see on the weekends, I'm always hiking and exploring because it's also good for the body, you know, when you're exercising. And we also know that when you're exercising, it actually grows new brain cells in your brain, you know, in your hippocampus, I believe. So just by doing mild cardiovascular exercise, it actually has a therapeutic benefit. So therefore, having a calendar is quite important in having that balance. But in addition to having a calendar, it's also really important to have a to-do list. So the calendar for me tells me when I'm going to do something, right? But at the same time, you also need to know what it is that you need to do. And for this, I use a particular application called Todoist. For me, Todoist is probably the most sophisticated to-do app in existence. I haven't come across something better in terms of its design, its interface, and what really makes it amazing is that you can have these different categories. You can see I've got surgery over here, and all the different surgical topics. You know, you can see under surgery, I've got different sections that I'm doing: breast, endocrine, upper GIT, hepatobiliary. So I'm basically separating all the things that I need to do over this block, right? So I'm currently doing surgery, benign breast disease, you know, all these things. So I know exactly all the things that I need to do. So this is very important. Before you start a block, you actually need to scope the block. This is very important. That it's just spending some time, and in the case of the preclinical years, it may be that you need to just spend some time scoping the course. So whenever you start something new, scope it. When I say scope it, what I mean is that you need to see everything that you need to do, everything that you need to cover, so that you know exactly what you need to do. What's always very anxiety provoking for me is going into sort of the exam week and then realizing that I haven't covered something. But if I can at least have a mental picture from the beginning of the block, and I know exactly what I need to do, and put it on Todoist, then I know exactly what I need to accomplish. But the worst thing is sort of coming up days before the exam, realizing, oh, wow, I missed this, I missed that. So I think having a good understanding from the beginning of the block of what you need to achieve, what you need to cover, is very important. So I used to do it almost as a mental repository of all the different tasks. And then I use the calendar app to tell me how I'm going to distribute those tasks over the course of a week. So that's how I sort of integrate the two apps. So you can see, you know, for surgery, we've got these different categories. What's really nice about Todoist is that you can have these different labels. So you can see benign breast disease, that's from the textbook. And then I've got a lecture on benign breast disease. And then you've got textbook. And then you've also got tutorials. You know, for some of these, you can see tutorials approach to a liver mass. This allows you to almost separate all the different things that you have. So Todoist, I really recommend, you know, you can have different things. So I have a label for, you can have these labels. So I have a label for projects. So all the different projects that I need to be aware of. So, or assignments, because, you know, with assignments, it's kind of, it's a bit challenging because you don't, it's not like a to do, because it's an ongoing process that you're sort of working on over a period of time. So just to be aware of all the ongoing projects can be quite valuable. So you can actually just quickly do this by clicking on the project's label, which I've created. And you can see I've got these things like, things to read. Nothing at the moment, but we'll be filling up soon. I also do like a morning routine, afternoon routine, evening routine. That's a bit excessive, but you don't need to. You can literally just structure this. I mean, the app is there for you. It's for you to really just design your life. But the thing for me is that it has such great potential and versatility. So that's kind of really how I structure my week. So, so I use these two apps and always trying to work ahead of time. So that's really the time management aspect. When it comes to actually studying, I've actually made a video on how to study, and I will ask the Preclinical Society to share this with you. It is quite long; it's about 90 minutes, but sometimes longer videos are more insightful, and you can't cover everything in the short time that I've been allocated. But essentially, the main point I'm making that video is that your brain is incredibly powerful. You've got a short-term memory and you've got a long-term memory. And your short-term memory only has a very, very small capacity. So the way I like to describe it is that your short-term memory is like a flash drive. Flash drive, it's got storage space, but very small. But the long-term memory is like a hard drive. It's got amazing, amazing storage space. And in fact, some of the neuroscientists even say that your long-term memory is actually infinite space that is available to you in your long-term memory. So let's use it. Why not use it? In medicine, or any allied degree, you have to learn how to use your brain. You have to make sure that you're retaining information. This is one of the great achievements of the health science students, is to be able to not just learn things, but to retain it. So especially in the preclinical years, is that when you're learning information, first year, second year, third year, you're not just learning it for the third year exams, you're essentially learning it for the rest of your clinical and practicing life. So why not find a way to retain the information that you learn and make that long-term investment? Because it often happens that people get to fourth year and fifth year, and then they have to relearn the anatomy and the physiology. And it's quite sad, because you're coming to fifth year not to learn anatomy. You're coming to fifth year to learn the clinical disciplines. You're coming to learn the pathologies and see them right in front of you in the wards. But it's going to take up a lot of your time to go back to all those basics. So if you get those basics strong and really cemented in the long-term memory, when you're in the preclinical years, you're really making a long-term, I really mean this, a long-term investment for your future as a health sciences student. So how do we do this? How do we learn information in the long term? Well, we have to make sure that we are activating our long-term memory. And the way that we activate our long-term memory is through repetition. The way the brain learns is through repetition. And one of the best ways to just see this in action is, how do you know your friends' names? I mean, if you look in your class, you can probably point out everybody's names. You didn't know them on the first day, but at the end of the week, you probably knew most of them. And that's because every day you were being exposed to those names. You didn't have to do any studying, it wasn't much effort, but it's because you were being constantly exposed on a regular basis to that content. You were able to put it into your long-term memory. And by long-term memory, I mean infinite storage space, but also it's long-term. You're not going to forget it anytime soon. So the same thing needs to occur with medicine. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we repeat things? Like that sounds very abstract, right? I mean, I'm telling you, you need to repeat things all the time, but how does this happen? And a lot of the neuroscientists have looked into this concept, and they've essentially looked at two factors, like how often should we memorize, how often should we repeat, and how should we repeat, right? So how should we learn? And what the neuroscientists have said, that active recall is the best means by which you can learn information. So what do we mean by active recall? Active recall is basically like setting questions for every concept that you learn, and then using those questions as a trigger for that answer. For example, I'm doing surgery at the moment, and I'm learning about, I just finished the breast section. So in benign breast disease, you learn about approaches to a breast lump, and you learn about the benign causes and the malignant causes. So the benign causes, got things like fibroadenoma, fat necrosis, galactocele, cysts, lipomas, abscess, granulomatous inflammation. But that's a concept, that's a fact, it's a list, differentials of a breast lump. So you can actually take that and make it into a question. And the question can be, what are the differentials for a breast lump? And so that's what you're doing, is that you're basically getting into the mind of your teacher. You're getting into the mind of your examiner, and you're asking yourself, well, if I wanted to test somebody's understanding of this, what would I do? Well, they would ask you a question. By asking questions, that is the best way of assessing competency. So if the examiner's way of testing your competency is by asking questions, then why can't you learn yourself by asking questions? And this is simply the basis for active recall. It's by prompting yourself with questions that lead you to the concepts that you're learning in the various sections. And this is what has been shown to be the most effective way of testing yourself. So if you take every concept that you're learning in medicine or any other allied health discipline, and you just create questions on all those things, it's one of the best ways. So for me, I use Quizlet. Quizlet is my go-to, Quizlet. But there are others. There's Anki. There's also something called IGETI. But the main thing is that you're creating these prompts, these question prompts that guide you to the answer. In fact, I don't actually make notes anymore. My notes is by creating the Quizlet flashcards. That's how I take notes now. Because again, why do we make notes? What is the purpose of making notes? I always ask this question to people, like, it makes us feel productive to make notes, right? But how is it actually serving us in terms of our retention? Sometimes by writing it helps to memorize, but are you actually testing that you know this concept by making notes? Not really. So that's why I think the best way to test that you know something is to ask yourself a question. And if you can answer that question, then that shows that you actually know it, because that's how they test you in your exams, right? They test you in your exams, they test your competency by asking questions. So why not learn like that? Okay, so that's active recall. That's how to learn. But there's also another concept in studying, which is called spaced repetition. It basically says that when you learn something for the first time, if you're exposed to something in a ward round or in your lectures, that concept will only stay with you for probably a couple of hours. And the reason for that is because it's in your short-term memory, right? And your short-term memory only lasts for a couple of hours. So if you don't do anything to that memory over the last couple of hours, then you're going to forget it. And that's what happens to most of us. We learn things in class and then we just forget it. And then the night before the exams, we're sort of trying to memorize this again. And it's not a pretty picture. So the best thing to do, and you'll see this on my calendar, is that I have these daily review sessions. So like for about an hour, where I spend just an hour going through everything that I did on that day, or everything that I learned on that day. And that's because the things that I learned on that day would only last me for a couple of hours. So by revising it, I'm pushing it further into my long-term memory. And what's really cool is that the more you revise, the longer the memory stays in your brain. So the first time you learn it, it lasts for a couple of hours. If you revise it again, it lasts longer. Then you revise it again, it lasts even longer until it gets into your long-term memory. But the key is that you do your daily revision, because if you don't do the daily revision, then the memory is lost automatically. Okay, so that's why the daily revision of what you did on that day is so important. Doesn't have to take long, but that daily revision is very important. At the end of the week, I do a weekly revision, which is basically when I revise everything that I've done on that week. So that serves almost as the second revision. The first revision is on the daily, and the second revision is on the weekly. And then from there, I'm shifting it further into the long-term memory. And I promise you, if you keep on doing this, you will start to see how much your brain can actually hold. And I always make this argument to people that there is actually so much that you know already. And there's so much passive studying that you've been doing your entire life, just with your names, the names of all the people that you know. You didn't study your friends' names, your family's names, yet you know it. It's stored in your long-term memory. Why? Well, because you've been repeating it and you've been passively studying it without much effort. So obviously studying has to come with effort, but it's very important that you realize that you need to put in effort, but couple that effort with efficiency. It's about time multiplied by efficiency. You cut out the time, you increase your time by removing the distractions, like I spoke about at the beginning. But you increase your efficiency by looking at things like active recall and spaced repetition. So yeah, I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, you found it helpful. It's quite short. I would actually like to, if you have any questions, you're welcome to email me. You can phone me. you can message me on WhatsApp. I'm very happy to speak to you. There's only so much that I can cover in this allocated time, but I hope that you've taken benefit from this. Okay, enjoy the rest of your day.